My name is Maria Santos, and I never thought my life would end in a snowbank on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado, with my 2 young children crying beside me. But sometimes fate has other plans, and sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. It was February 1887, and I had been traveling for 3 weeks with my children, Elena, age 6, and Miguel, age 4, trying to reach my sister's farm in Wyoming. My husband had died of consumption the previous autumn, leaving us with nothing but debts and the clothes on our backs. The landlord had given us until Christmas to pay what we owed, but Christmas came and went with empty pockets and emptier stomachs. "Mama, when will we get there?" Elena had asked as we trudged through the snow that morning, her small hand clutching mine with desperate trust. "Soon, Mija," I had whispered, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "Very soon." But the storm had come without warning, as winter storms do in the mountains. One moment we were walking along the road with other travelers, and the next we were alone in a world of white fury. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow fell so thick I couldn't see my own feet. I had tried to find shelter, any shelter, but there was nothing. No buildings, no caves, no trees large enough to break the wind. Just endless white and the terrible cold that seemed to seep into my bones and steal my strength with every step. Elena and Miguel had grown quiet, their little bodies shivering uncontrollably despite the blankets I had wrapped around them. I knew the signs, I had seen them before in the tenements of Denver. Hypothermia was setting in, and without warmth soon, we would all die in this frozen wasteland. "Mama," Miguel whispered, his lips blue with cold, "I'm sleepy." "No, Mijo," I said, shaking him gently. "You have to stay awake. We have to keep walking." But I was lying to him, and I knew it. I could barely feel my own legs anymore, and each step was becoming harder than the last. The cold was winning, and I was running out of strength to fight it. When I finally collapsed in the snow, unable to take another step, I pulled my children close to me and tried to shield them with my body. It wasn't much protection, but it was all I had left to give. "Mama?" Elena's voice was so small, so frightened. "It's going to be okay, mi amor," I whispered, though I could feel the life slowly draining out of me. "Close your eyes and think of somewhere warm. Think of Abuela's kitchen, with the fire burning and the smell of fresh tortillas." "I don't want to think about food," Miguel whimpered. "I'm too hungry." My heart broke for my children. They were so young, so innocent, and they didn't deserve to die like this. They deserved to grow up, to laugh and play and fall in love and have children of their own. But instead, they were going to freeze to death in the snow because their mother had failed to protect them. I closed my eyes and prayed to the Virgin Mary, to my dead husband, to anyone who might be listening. "Please," I whispered into the wind. "If you can't save me, at least save my children. They're innocent. They don't deserve this." The snow continued to fall, and the wind continued to howl, and I felt myself growing weaker and weaker. My vision was starting to blur, and I could feel a strange warmth spreading through my body, the kind of warmth that comes just before the end. That's when I heard the footsteps at first. I thought I was hallucinating. The sound was so soft, so careful, almost like an animal moving through the snow. But then I heard a voice, speaking in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood to be gentle and concerned. I forced my eyes open and saw him through the swirling snow, a boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old, with long black hair and dark skin that marked him as Apache. He was wearing traditional clothing made of leather and fur, and his eyes were the deepest brown I had ever seen. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I was a Mexican woman with 2 small children, dying in the snow. He was an Apache boy, alone in the wilderness. By all rights, he should have walked away. Our peoples had not always been friends, and he owed us nothing. But instead of walking away, he knelt down beside us in the snow. "You are cold," he said in broken English, his voice soft and concerned. I tried to speak, but my lips were too numb to form words. All I could do was nod weakly and pull my children closer to me. The boy looked at Elena and Miguel, who were staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. Then, without hesitation, he began to remove his coat, a beautiful garment made of buffalo hide and lined with rabbit fur. "No," I managed to whisper. "You'll freeze." But he shook his head and gently wrapped his coat around all three of us. It was warm, so wonderfully warm, and I could feel the life flowing back into my frozen limbs. "My name is Aiyana," he said, settling down beside us in the snow. "It means eternal blossom in my language." "Maria," I whispered. "These are my children, Elena and Miguel." Aiyana nodded solemnly, as if we had just been formally introduced at a social gathering instead of meeting in the middle of a blizzard. "You cannot stay here," he said. "The storm will get worse. I know a place where we can be warm." "I can't walk," I admitted. "I'm too weak." "Then I will help you." And he did. This boy, who couldn't have weighed much more than I did, somehow found the strength to help me to my feet. He put one of my arms around his shoulders and wrapped his other arm around my waist, supporting most of my weight as we began to move through the snow. Elena and Miguel walked beside us, still wrapped in Aiyana's coat, their small hands clutching at the fur lining as if it were a lifeline. Which, I suppose, it was. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. "To safety," Aiyana replied simply. The journey felt like it took hours, though it was probably only minutes. Aiyana led us through the storm with the confidence of someone who had grown up in this harsh landscape, navigating by landmarks I couldn't see and following paths I couldn't detect. Finally, we reached what looked like a small hill covered in snow. But as we got closer, I realized it was actually a shelter, a traditional Apache wickiup, built low to the ground and covered with hides and branches to blend in with the landscape. "This is where I was staying," Aiyana explained as he helped me inside. "It is warm and dry." The inside of the wickiup was indeed warm, heated by a small fire that burned in the center. There were furs spread on the ground for sleeping, and I could see supplies stored along the walls: food, water, extra blankets. Aiyana helped me settle down near the fire, then gently took his coat back and wrapped my children in warm furs instead. Elena and Miguel huddled close to me, their colors slowly returning as the warmth seeped into their small bodies. "Thank you," I whispered to Aiyana. "You saved our lives." He shrugged, as if saving the lives of strangers was something he did every day. "My grandmother always said that the spirits send us the people we need to help, when we need to help them." "But why did you help us? You don't know us." Aiyana was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I know what it is like to be alone and afraid," he said finally. "I know what it is like to think you are going to die." "Are you alone out here?" "My family was killed by soldiers 3 moons ago," he said matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I have been traveling since then, looking for other members of my tribe." My heart ached for this boy who had lost everything but still had the compassion to help strangers. "I'm sorry," I said. "It is the way of things," he replied. "But today, the spirits brought you to me, and me to you. Maybe that means something." As the storm raged outside, we settled in for the night. Aiyana shared his food with us, dried meat and berries that tasted better than any feast I had ever eaten. He told my children stories about the animals of the forest, speaking in his gentle, careful English while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. "Why do you speak English?" Elena asked. "I learned at the mission school, before." He trailed off, but I understood. "Before his family was killed. Before his world was destroyed." "Can you teach us some words in your language?" Miguel asked, his natural curiosity overcoming his shyness. Aiyana smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him. "Shima means mother," he said, looking at me. "And you," he said to Elena, "are Ashkiai Yaji, little girl." "And you," he said to Miguel, "are Ashkiai, boy." My children repeated the words carefully, their faces serious with concentration. It was the first time I had seen them smile since we left Denver as the night wore on. I found myself watching this remarkable boy who had saved our lives. He moved with a quiet grace that spoke of years spent in the wilderness, and his eyes held a wisdom that seemed far too old for his young face. But there was also a sadness there, a loneliness that I recognized because I felt it too. "Aiyana," I said quietly, after my children had fallen asleep. "What will you do when the storm passes?" "Continue looking for my people," he said. Or find a new place to belong. What if you don't find them? He was quiet for a long time. Then I will be alone until the spirits call me home. The thought of this brave, kind boy spending his life alone in the wilderness broke my heart. You don't have to be alone, I said softly. What do you mean? Come with us. To my sister's farm in Wyoming. She would welcome you, I know she would. You could have a family again. Aiyana looked at me with surprise. You would want me? Even though I am Apache? I would want you because you are kind and brave and good. Because you saved my children's lives. Because... I paused, trying to find the right words. Because I think maybe the spirits brought us together for a reason. He considered this, staring into the fire. Your sister would not mind. My sister Carmen has a big heart and a bigger table. She always said there was room for one more. And your children? They would accept me? I looked at Elena and Miguel, sleeping peacefully under the warm furs. They already have, I said. Did you see how they looked at you when you were telling them stories? You're already family to them. Aiyana was quiet for a long time, and I could see him struggling with the decision. Finally, he looked up at me with those deep brown eyes. I will come with you, he said. If you are sure. I'm sure. Then I will be your son, if you will have me. Tears filled my eyes. I would be honored to have you as my son. And so it was that in a small Apache shelter, in the middle of a blizzard that should have killed us all, our family was born. Not through blood or marriage, but through an act of pure compassion that saved not just our lives, but our souls. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside our little shelter, we were warm and safe and no longer alone. I had set out from Denver as a desperate widow with 2 children and no hope. Now I was a mother of 3, with a son who had taught me that family isn't about where you come from, but about who you choose to love. I drifted off to sleep that night. With my children safe beside me and my new son keeping watch over us all, I whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits had brought us together. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. When I woke the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was pristine. White and sparkling in the early sunlight, beautiful but treacherous. Aiyana was already awake, tending the fire and preparing food for our journey. The snow is deep, he said quietly, but the path to the main road is clear. We can travel today. If you are strong enough. I tested my limbs, surprised to find that the warmth and rest had restored much of my strength. I can travel, I said. But are you sure you want to come with us? Once we leave here, there's no going back. Aiyana looked at me with those serious, dark eyes. I have been alone for 3 moons. I remember what it was like to have a family, to belong somewhere. If you will have me, I want to try again. Elena and Miguel woke slowly, blinking in the bright light filtering through the shelter's entrance. For a moment, they looked confused, as if they couldn't quite remember where they were or how they had gotten there. Then they saw Aiyana, and their faces lit up with smiles. Aiyana! Miguel exclaimed, scrambling over to where the boy sat. Are you really coming with us? If your mother will have me, Aiyana replied solemnly. Of course she will. Elena said, as if the idea of refusing was ridiculous. You saved us. Your family now. The simple acceptance in my children's voices brought tears to my eyes. They had lost their father, their home, everything familiar, but they were ready to embrace this Apache boy as their brother without hesitation. We prepared for the journey carefully. Aiyana showed us how to wrap our feet in extra cloth to prevent frostbite, and how to move through deep snow without exhausting ourselves. He gave us each a piece of dried meat to chew on for energy, and filled a water skin from melted snow. Your sister's farm, he said as we prepared to leave the shelter. How far is it? 3 days walk, maybe 4 in the snow, I replied. Carmen lives near a town called Sweetwater. Her husband raises cattle and horses. And you think they will accept me? I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, and I understood. Relations between Mexicans and Apaches had not always been peaceful, and he had no way of knowing what kind of reception he would receive. Aiyana, I said, taking his hands in mine. Carmen and her husband Roberto are good people. They judge others by their actions, not their blood. When they see how you saved us, how you cared for us, they will welcome you with open arms. And if they don't, then we'll find somewhere else to go. All of us, together. The certainty in my voice seemed to reassure him, and he nodded. Then let us go to your sister. The journey was difficult but not impossible. Aiyana led the way, using his knowledge of the wilderness to find the safest paths through the snow. He showed Elena and Miguel how to read the signs of the forest, which way the wind was blowing, how to tell if animals had passed this way. How to find water under the ice. How do you know all this? Elena asked as we rested beside a frozen stream. My grandfather taught me, Aiyana replied. He said that the earth speaks to those who know how to listen. What does it say? Miguel wanted to know. Aiyana was quiet for a moment, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Today it says that the weather will hold, that we are safe, and that we are going in the right direction. Can you teach us to listen too? If you want to learn. And so, as we walked, Aiyana began teaching my children the skills his grandfather had taught him. He showed them how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to identify edible plants even in winter, how to find their way by the position of the sun and stars, but more than wilderness skills, he was teaching them something else. Patience, observation, respect for the natural world. I watched my children transform as they walked beside their new brother, becoming more confident, more aware, more connected to the world around them. On the second day, we encountered other travelers on the road, a family with a wagon who had also been caught in the storm. When they saw Aiyana, their expressions grew wary. That's an Apache boy, the man said to me in a low voice. You shouldn't be traveling with him. It's not safe. He saved our lives, I replied firmly. He's my son. The woman looked shocked. Your son? But he's brave and kind and good, I said, cutting her off. That's all that matters to me. The family exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but they didn't press the issue. As we parted ways, I heard the man mutter something about mixing with savages, but I ignored him. Aiyana had heard the exchange too, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, though he tried to hide it. Some people fear what they don't understand, I told him as we continued walking. But their ignorance doesn't define your worth. In the mission school, they told us that we were savages, he said quietly. That our ways were wrong, that we needed to become like white people to be good. And what do you think? I think there are good people and bad people in every tribe, every nation. The color of their skin or the language they speak doesn't change that. His wisdom impressed me. This boy, who had lost everything and been called a savage by those who claimed to be civilized, understood humanity better than most adults I knew. That evening, we made camp in a grove of pine trees that provided some shelter from the wind. As we sat around our small fire, sharing the last of Aiyana's dried meat, Elena asked the question I had been dreading. Aiyana, what happened to your family? I started to intervene, to tell her it wasn't polite to ask such personal questions. But Aiyana held up a hand to stop me. It's all right, he said. She should know. He stared into the fire for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was steady but sad. We were camped by a river, my family and about 20 others from our band. We thought we were safe. It was winter, and the soldiers usually stayed in their forts during the cold months. But they came anyway, in the early morning when most people were still sleeping. Elena and Miguel listened with wide eyes, not fully understanding but sensing the gravity of his words. They said we were trespassing on white man's land, even though our people had lived there for generations. They said we had to go to the reservation, but my father said we had done nothing wrong, that we just wanted to live in peace. What happened then? Elena whispered. There was shooting. My mother pushed me into the river and told me to swim downstream and hide. I wanted to stay and fight, but she made me promise to live, to survive, to remember our people. And you never saw them again? Aiyana shook his head. When I came back the next day, everyone was gone. The camp was burned. I found some graves, but... He trailed off, unable to finish, but I reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently. I'm sorry, I said. No child should have to go through that. But now I have a new family, he said, looking at each of us in turn. And maybe that's what my mother wanted, for me to find people to love and protect. We love you too, Miguel said simply, crawling over to sit beside Aiyana. You're our brother now. Elena nodded in agreement. And brothers take care of each other. Always, Aiyana agreed, putting his arms around both children. On the third day, we finally saw smoke rising in the distance, the first sign of civilization we had encountered since leaving the shelter. My heart began to race with anticipation and nervousness. Soon, very soon, we would reach Carmen's farm, and I would have to explain how our family had grown from 3 to 4. Are you nervous? I asked Aiyana as we walked toward the distant smoke. Yes, he admitted. What if they don't want me? What if they think you made a mistake? Then. They don't know you like we do, Elena said firmly. And if they don't want you, we don't want them. Her fierce loyalty to her new brother made me proud. In just 3 days, these children had formed a bond that seemed unbreakable. As we crested a hill, Carmen's farm came into view, a modest house surrounded by barns and corrals, with cattle dotting the snowy fields. Smoke rose from the chimney, and I could see figures moving around the yard. There it is, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Home. We walked down the hill together. Our little family of 4, ready to face whatever awaited us. I knew there would be questions, possibly resistance, certainly confusion. But I also knew that Carmen had a good heart, and that once she understood what Aiyana had done for us, she would welcome him as I had today. As we approached the house, the front door opened and Carmen emerged, shading her eyes against the sun. When she recognized me, she let out a cry of joy and ran toward us through the snow. Maria. Thank God, we were so worried. We heard about the storm and... She stopped short when she saw Aiyana, her expression shifting to confusion. Carmen, I said, this is Aiyana. He saved our lives. Carmen looked from me to the boy and back again, taking in our travel-worn appearance and the obvious bond between us. Saved your lives. We were dying in the snow, Elena piped up. Aiyana found us and gave us his coat and took us to his warm house and shared his food, and now he's our brother. Carmen's eyes widened as she processed this rapid-fire explanation. Then she looked at Aiyana, really looked at him, seeing past his Apache features to the gentle, serious boy beneath. You saved my sister and her children? Aiyana nodded solemnly. They needed help. And now? Now we are family, he said simply. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, studying all of us. Then, to my relief and joy, she smiled and opened her arms. Then. Welcome home, Mijo, she said to Aiyana. Welcome home. As we walked toward the house together, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had made it. Against all odds, through storm and cold and the prejudice of strangers, we had made it to safety. And more than that, we had found each other. The boy who had covered us with his coat had given us more than warmth. He had given us hope, love, and the chance to be a family again. And in return, we had given him what he needed most, a place to belong. The first few weeks at Carmen's farm were a time of adjustment for all of us. Roberto, Carmen's husband, was initially skeptical about having an Apache boy in his home, but his doubts quickly faded as he watched Aiyana's gentle interactions with Elena and Miguel and heard the full story of how he had saved our lives. Any boy who would give his coat to strangers in a blizzard is welcome at my table, Roberto declared after our first week there. Family is family, no matter where they come from. Aiyana proved to be a remarkable addition to our household. His Wilderness skills, learned from his grandfather, were invaluable on the ranch. He could track lost cattle through snow that would confuse even experienced cowboys, predict weather changes days in advance, and gentle the wildest horses with a patience that amazed everyone. How does he do it? Roberto asked one day as we watched Aiyana work with a particularly stubborn mare that had been giving the ranch hands trouble for weeks. He listens, I replied, remembering what Aiyana had told my children about the earth speaking to those who knew how to hear it. He understands that every creature has its own language. But it wasn't just his practical skills that made Aiyana special. He had a way of bringing out the best in everyone around him. Elena, who had been shy and withdrawn since her father's death, blossomed under her new brother's patient attention. Miguel, who had been prone to tantrums and tears, became calmer and more confident as Aiyana taught him to observe the world with Apache eyes. Tell us about your grandfather, Elena would beg during the long winter evenings, and Aiyana would share stories of the old Apache ways, tales of brave warriors and wise women, of spirits that lived in the mountains and rivers, of a time when his people roamed free across the vast southwestern landscape. Was your grandfather a chief? Miguel asked one night. No, Aiyana replied. He was a storyteller and a healer. He said that was more important than being a war leader, because stories and healing last longer than battles. What kind of stories did he tell? Stories about how the world was made, about why the coyote howls at the moon, about how the first horses came to the Apache people. Aiyana's eyes grew distant. He said that stories are how we remember who we are, even when everything else is taken away. Carmen, who had been listening from the kitchen, wiped her eyes with her apron. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, she said. He was. He taught me that every person we meet is a teacher, and every day is a chance to learn something new. What? Have you learned from us? Elena asked. Aiyana considered this seriously. I have learned that family is not just about blood. I have learned that kindness can come from unexpected places. And I have learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you really need. As winter gave way to spring, Aiyana's integration into our family became complete. He helped Roberto with the cattle, taught Elena and Miguel to ride horses properly, and assisted Carmen with the endless tasks of running a ranch household. But more than that, he brought a sense of peace and purpose to our lives that had been missing since my husband's death. He's like the son I never had, Roberto confided to me one evening as we watched Aiyana teaching Miguel how to rope a fence post. That boy has more wisdom in his little finger than most grown men have in their whole bodies. He's been through things no child should have to endure, I replied. But instead of making him bitter, it made him compassionate. That's the mark of true character. But our peaceful existence was threatened one day in late spring when a group of soldiers rode up to the farm. They were led by a hard-faced captain who introduced himself as Captain Morrison. We're looking for a runaway Apache boy, he announced without preamble. About 12 or 13 years old. We have reports that he's been seen in this area. My blood ran cold. I knew immediately that they were looking for Aiyana, though I couldn't understand why. What do you want with this boy? Roberto asked, his voice carefully neutral. He's supposed to be on the reservation, Captain Morrison replied. All Apaches are required by law to live on designated lands. This boy is in violation of federal regulations. And what happens if you find him? He'll be returned to the reservation, of course. It's for his own good, and for the safety of the local population. I thought of the reservation I had heard described, a barren piece of land where proud people were forced to live in poverty, dependent on government handouts, forbidden to practice their traditional ways. The idea of Aiyana being sent to such a place made me sick. We haven't seen any Apache boys, Carmen said firmly. Just our family. Captain Morrison's eyes narrowed. We have reliable reports that an Apache boy was seen traveling with a Mexican woman and 2 children. The description matches your family. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my heart pounding. The captain studied me for a long moment, then gestured to his men. Search the property. You have no right, Roberto began, but the captain cut him off. I have every right. This is a matter of federal law. As the soldiers spread out to search the farm, I prayed that Aiyana was far away, perhaps in the high pasture with the cattle. But my prayers were answered in an unexpected way. Captain Morrison? Elena's clear voice rang out across the yard that we all turned to see my daughter standing on the porch, her chin raised in a gesture of defiance that reminded me of myself. Yes, little girl. Are you looking for my brother? My heart stopped. What was Elena doing? Your brother. Yes, sir. My brother Aiyana. He's not Apache anymore. He's Mexican now, like us. Mama adopted him. Captain Morrison looked confused. Adopted him? Yes, sir. He saved our lives in the blizzard, so Mama made him our brother. That makes him Mexican, doesn't it? The captain looked from Elena to me, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. Adoption doesn't change a person's race, he said finally. But it changes their family, Miguel piped up, appearing beside his sister. And families stick together. At that moment, Aiyana emerged from the barn, having heard the commotion. He walked slowly toward us, his head held high, showing no fear despite the obvious danger. I am the one you seek, he said to Captain Morrison. But these people speak the truth. I am no longer just Apache. I am also Mexican, and American, and part of this family. That's not how the law works, boy, the captain said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. Then perhaps the law is wrong, Aiyana replied calmly. Roberto stepped forward. Captain, this boy has been living with us for months. He's part of our family, helps with our ranch, goes to church with us on Sundays. He's not causing any trouble. The law is the law. And what law says a family can't adopt a child who needs a home? Carmen demanded. What law says a boy can't choose where he belongs? Captain Morrison looked around at all of us, at Roberto and Carmen standing protectively near Aiyana, at Elena and Miguel flanking their adopted brother, at me with my arms crossed and my eyes blazing with maternal fury. This is highly irregular, he muttered. So, is a 12-year-old boy surviving alone in the wilderness after his family was massacred? I said sharply. So, is a child giving his coat to strangers in a blizzard? So is love crossing the boundaries that adults try to build between peoples? The captain was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with his duty and his conscience. If I report that I found no Apache boy here, just a Mexican family with their adopted son, would that be accurate? He asked finally. Completely accurate, Roberto said firmly. Captain Morrison nodded slowly. Then I suppose we'll have to continue our search elsewhere. As the soldiers rode away, we all stood together in the yard, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. Did they really just leave? Elena whispered. They did, Aiyana said, his voice full of wonder. You saved me, just like I saved you. That's what families do, Miguel said matter-of-factly. We take care of each other. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Roberto raised his glass of water in a toast. To family, he said. Not the family we're born into, but the family we choose. To family, we all echoed, and I looked around the table at these people I loved, Carmen and Roberto, who had opened their home and hearts to us. Elena and Miguel, who had grown so much stronger and wiser, and Aiyana, the Apache boy who had taught us all what it meant to truly love without conditions. Aiyana, I said, do you remember what you told me that first night, about the spirits sending us the people we need to help? Yes, Shima. He had taken to calling me by the Apache word for mother, and it never failed to warm my heart. I think you were right. I think the spirits knew that we all needed each other. Even when it seemed like we were just strangers in a storm. Especially then. Sometimes the most important meetings happen when we least expect them. Years later, when people asked me about my son Aiyana, I would tell them about a blizzard that nearly killed us all, and an Apache boy who covered us with his coat. I would tell them about a child who had lost everything but still had enough compassion to save strangers. And I would tell them about how sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Aiyana grew up to become a bridge between worlds, fluent in Apache, Spanish, and English, comfortable in the wilderness and the town, respected by ranchers and tribal elders alike. He used his unique position to help other displaced Native children find homes and families, and to promote understanding between the different peoples of the Southwest. But to me, he would always be the boy who gave his coat to a dying woman and her children, who chose love over fear, who showed us all that family is not about blood or race or tradition, but about the willingness to care for each other no matter what. The single mother who was dying in the snow had been saved by more than just a warm coat. She had been saved by the love of a boy who understood that we are all connected, all part of the same human family, all deserving of compassion and care, and the Apache boy who covered her with his coat had been saved too, not just from loneliness and despair, but from a world that wanted to define him by his race rather than his character. In our family, he found the freedom to be exactly who he was meant to be, a bridge builder, a healer, a son. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. The end.